The turning world. Dollar decline, democracy in crisis, and the path towards peace. The world is shifting in profound ways. The international order that has prevailed since the mid-20th centuries, rooted in the dominance of the US dollar and the promise of liberal democracy and the assumption of endless economic growth, is unraveling before our eyes. The cracks in the systems are not subtle. Inflation gnaws at household budgets, debt mounts to unsustainable levels, the gap between rich and poor widens into a chasm, and political systems that once claimed legitimacy appear hollow and ineffective. At the heart of this transformation lies a simple truth. The dollar, the cornerstone of the global economy, is no longer anchored to tangible value. Once tied to gold, it now floats freely, propped up by trust, debt, and the sheer weight of American power. But as that trust erodes and rivals gather strength, the future of the dollar looks increasingly uncertain. Meanwhile, democracy, the much celebrated export of Western nations, is revealing its fragility. Costly elections, uniformed choices, and manipulation by elites reduce it to a spectacle rather than a genuine exercise of collective will. Nowhere are these issues more visible than in societies like Ethiopia, where economic hardship, political corruption, and the manipulation of international financial institutions intertwine to produce deep resentment. The case of Ethiopia illustrates how a nation can build monumental projects such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, promising prosperity, while still teetering on the brink of collapse due to unresolved political tensions. This essay explores this interconnected crisis: the decline of the dollar, the failure of democracy, the sign of societal collapse, and the urgent need for new pathways toward peace. Speaking through the lens of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace, EHFP, and African Hearts for Peace, AHFP, I, Abebe Negash, will offer not only a critique of the old order, but also a call for calm, dialogue, and ethical leadership in building a more just world. Part 1. The dollar and the global economy. The dollar's dominance is one of the great paradoxes of the modern age. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system established the US dollar as the anchor of international trade, tied directly to gold. This arrangement gave nations confidence that their reserves held real value. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility into gold, ushering in the fiat era. Since then, the dollar has been backed not by tangible assets, but by faith in America's economy and military might. For decades, this system seemed stable enough. The US printed dollars, and the world accepted them. Oil was priced in dollars, international trade flowed through dollars, and nations accumulated dollars reserves. But cracks appeared as the US debt ballooned, and the Federal Reserve resorted to printing more money to stave off crisis. The global financial crash of 2008 exposed the fragility of the system, and the COVID-19 pandemic deepened the reliance on debt-driven monetary expansion. The consequences of a currency untethered to reality are felt by ordinary people. Inflation quietly robs families of their savings. Wages fail to keep pace with costs of living. The middle class, the supposed bedrock of stable societies, find itself squeezed, its purchasing power eroding year after year. For those without assets, survival becomes precarious. Meanwhile, rivals to the US dominance are rising. The BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has gained momentum by advocating for a multipolar world order and exploring alternatives to the dollar. China, with its vast manufacturing base and growing financial networks, leads the charge. Russia, battered by sanctions, accelerates efforts to bypass the dollar system. Even smaller nations, wary of dollar dependency, look for ways to assert autonomy. The dollar, once a symbol of stability, increasingly looks like a weapon. Countries subjected to US sanctions understand this acutely. As confidence wanes, the stage is set for a seismic shift in the global economy. A world where the dollar is no longer supreme may be closer than many imagine. Mind you, the dollar, if you have it now, even in my own lifetime, I have seen how it gets lighter, weaker, and paper-like when it's printed out. It lost its values. Part 2. Democracy. Promise versus reality. Democracy, in its ideal form, promises freedom, equality, and representation. The people, empowered by the vote, choose their leaders and hold them accountable. In theory, it is the antidote to tyranny and corruption. But in practice, democracy has often fallen short of this lofty vision. In the United States, democracy functions, but at a staggering cost. Billions are spent on elections, campaigns stretch endlessly, and politics becomes a context of wealth and media power rather than ideas. Polarization undermines consensus, while corporate lobbies wield influence for greater than the average voter. Elections are frequently contested, their legitimacy questioned, leaving citizens disillusioned. When exported to nations without strong institutions or widespread education, democracy often fails more spectacularly. Elections become spectacles manipulated by elites, illiterate, or uninformed citizens are asked to choose between candidates they barely understand, often swayed by ethnic loyalties, propaganda, or outright bribery. The result is representative governance but recycled corruption. Ethiopia is a stark example. Its federal system, enshrined in Article 39 of the Constitution, grants ethnic groups the right to secede. While framed as self-determination, in practice it fuels division and fragmentation. Leaders exploit ethnic identities to consolidate power, leaving the nation perpetually unstable. The democratic process is costly and contested, while the true needs of the people, peace, security, opportunity, remain unmet. Democracy's promise has, in many contexts, become a deception. It assumes that people are empowered, but without education, unity, and trust, the ballot box is little more than a stage for elites to perform their power plays. Elections consume vast resources yet deliver little in the way of justice or stability. The cost of democracy, both financial and social, is immense, and its returns increasingly questionable. Part 3. Signs of societal collapse. Societies do not collapse overnight. They erode slowly through a combination of economic strain, political corruption, and growing resentment. Eventually, the weight becomes too great, and systems once taken for granted fall apart. The warning signs are everywhere. Inflation makes basic necessities unaffordable. Housing costs skyrocket, leaving families unable to pay rent. The middle class shrinks and inadequately reaches growth school levels. Resentment builds among those who feel excluded, and eventually anger spills into the streets. History shows that when people can no longer feed, shelter, or clothe themselves, they revolt. In Ethiopia, these dynamics are painfully visible. The currency has been repeatedly devaluated under the pressure of IMF policies, eroding purchasing power. Resentment spreads as insecurity becomes daily reality for millions. Political elites, far from providing solutions, are mired in corruption and self-interest. The result is a society on the edge, where desperation pushes people towards violence as the only perceived path out of misery. GERD section. In Ethiopia, the government recently announced the near completion of the Grand Ethiopian Dam, GERD, a project decades in the making and often described as a crown jewel of the nation's modern aspirations. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, in a speech celebrating this milestone, acknowledged the contributions of former leaders who initiated and carried forward the dam's construction, while crediting his own administration with the final push towards completion. He even envisioned building more dams upstream, promising that such projects would not harm downstream nations. Indeed, GERD is a monumental asset, provided the turbines are maintained with reliable spare parts. It has the potential to serve Ethiopia for generations, stabilizing the power grid, fueling agricultural expansion. The Prime Minister's vision of agricultural enhancement powered by Abebe, as Ethiopians call the Blue Nile, as Ethiopians call it Abebe, the Blue Nile, could indeed transform the nation's economic foreground. But there lies the paradox. While GERD promises prosperity, the political undercurrents remain unresolved. Without genuine adjustment to political narratives and without addressing the infiltration of institutions like the IMF and World Bank into Ethiopia's economic lifeline, the resentment among citizens fester. For many Ethiopians, from farmers to students to urban workers, life is still defined by insecurity, inflation, and political corruption. Today, people from all walks of life are metaphorically armed in their minds, thinking of fighting their way out of despair. This is a dangerous act of desperation. If not addressed, if not addressed, the flood of resentment within society may be greater and more destructive than the water contained behind the walls of GERD itself. The dam may hold back the Nile, but no concrete structure can restrain the frustrations of a million people who feel politically betrayed and economically abandoned. You see, Ethiopia has over 200 million people. Census was undermined for political reasons, so no accurate counts, but the population has boomed. Here, the path forward must be clear. The government must hold back, reflect, and address these political problems immediately before the social flood waters overflow. Part 4. A Voice for Peace. Abebe Negash. Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace. At this crossroads, it is necessary to speak plainly and urgently. I, Abebe Negash, on behalf of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace, offer this reflection. The world cannot continue down the path of endless fighting, resentment, and exploitation. A moment of pause is desperately needed. Violence has never delivered lasting peace. Revolutions may overthrow rulers, but they rarely resolve the deeper fractures of society. Instead, they often replace one tyranny with another. That Ethiopia and indeed the world needs is not more bloodshed, but more reflection. We must take time off from conflict and instead cultivate a culture of dialogue, reconciliation, and ethical leadership. Ethical leadership is not about lofty speeches, but about responsibility and legacy. Leaders must be judged not by what they promise, but by what they do. Their social standing, their record of service, and the testimony of those who know them best should weigh more heavily than campaign slogans. True leadership emerges from character, not from manipulation. Democracy, as currently practiced, may not provide the answers, but neither does authoritarianism. We need alternative models rooted in community councils, moral authority, and social accountability. Africa, with its long tradition of communal decision-making, has the resources to draw upon. The elders' councils, the communal gatherings, and the ethic of shared responsibility offer blueprints for governance that are both authentic and effective. Ethiopia must embrace justice and reconciliation. Without justice, resentment festers. Without reconciliation, division deepens. The atrocities of the past and present cannot simply be ignored. They must be confronted, acknowledged, and resolved. Only then can unity emerge. Beyond Ethiopia, Africa must stand together. The continent's future cannot be outsourced to foreign powers or dictated by institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Therefore, Pan-African solidarity is not a dream, but a necessity. In a world where old powers decline and new blocs rise, Africa's unity will determine whether it prospers or perishes. In conclusion, the world is turning. The dollar's decline, the failure of democracy, and the rise of resentment all point towards a potential societal collapse. The signs are already visible. Economic insecurity, political corruption, and the growing anger of politicians who feel and the growing anger of populations who feel abandoned by their leaders. Ethiopia, with its monumental GERD and its fragile politics, stands as a symbol of both hope and peril. But collapse is not inevitable. If we can pause, reflect, and embrace dialogue, a different path opens. Ethical leadership, rooted in responsibility and legacy, can guide societies towards peace. Justice and reconciliation can heal divisions. Pan-African solidarity can create resilience against external exploitation. The flood of resentment threatens to overwhelm us, but it does not have to be that way. Humanity had the wisdom to overcome chaos. If we choose to use it, the path forward requires calm, patience, and courage. In the worlds of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace, let us reject violence, embrace dialogue, and build a future where prosperity and peace are not the privilege of a few, but the inheritance of all. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Abebe Negash on behalf of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace. Thank you.